I always believed that silence could protect peace. I used to think that if I stayed calm and patient, then people would eventually understand my worth. Tonight, I discovered how wrong I was. The table in my dining room had never looked so polished. I spent the entire afternoon cleaning every plate until I could see my reflection in the ceramic. The roast smelled of rosemary and garlic. The candles were waiting to be lit. I even placed folded napkins beside each dish as if I were preparing for honored guests. They were not honored. They were my son and his family. Yet for some reason, I still treated their arrival as if I needed to impress them. They arrived 40 minutes late. No apology, no explanation. The front door opened, and Sophie stepped in first while talking on her phone. She did not glance at me. She continued her call as she walked straight through the hallway with her heels clicking like impatient taps on tile. Mark followed behind her with the children who were already glued to their tablets. He gave me a quick smile that looked more like a reflex than affection. I opened my arms to greet them. Nobody moved toward me. My arms felt foolish, so I lowered them and pretended I was fixing my sweater. The air already carried the scent of judgment even before anyone spoke. Dinner started with awkward scraping of chairs. Sophie looked at the food as if it were a science experiment that had gone wrong. She murmured that she preferred low-carb meals. I told her there was salad on the side. She replied that the dressing looked processed and she preferred organic olive oil. I smiled and passed it to her without a word. Silence again, not peaceful, just heavy. The children refused to eat the vegetables. They asked for fries. Sophie looked at me and said maybe next time I could consider something more modern for young taste buds. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Mark stayed quiet while scrolling through his phone. I wondered when he became a stranger who sat at my table like a distant visitor. I tried to start conversations. I asked about the children's school. The answers were short. I asked about Mark's work. He nodded and said busy. I asked Sophie about her new fitness club. She said it was exclusive and probably not for my age group. She laughed. Nobody joined her laughter. Even the children sensed it was not real joy. There was a moment when I caught my reflection in the window beside the table. My eyes looked tired but kind. I realized nobody at this table truly saw that kindness. To them, I was background noise, an old song playing quietly in another room, familiar yet unnecessary. Sophie placed her fork down and sighed loudly. She said maybe it was time for me to think about a care residence. She said it gently, but with sugar that tasted like poison. She claimed it would be safer for someone at my stage of life. She said she and Mark had been discussing it for my own good. I did not answer. I kept chewing although my mouth had gone dry. My hands stayed on the table very steady. I knew if I moved them they would shake. I looked at my son. He did not look back. He pretended to adjust his napkin. For the rest of the meal nobody spoke. Even the children felt the crack in the air. The candles were still unlit. I realized I had been saving them for hope. Perhaps I should have lit them before anyone arrived. Perhaps then I could have pretended this night was bright. When dessert came they declined. They said they were full. They stood up and helped themselves to the living room couch as if the meal had been a small inconvenience before entertainment. Sophie turned on the television. The laughter from the show filled the house like artificial happiness. I remained at the table. I stared at the empty plates and the untouched dessert. The room smelled of disappointment masked in vanilla. I pressed my fingers against the edge of the table to keep myself from crying. I refused to cry in front of people who would not understand why. That was the moment I realized silence had not protected me. It had buried me. I stayed at the table long after they had moved to the living room. The sound of laughter from that television audience kept echoing through the walls. It was strange how canned laughter could make a house feel even lonelier. They laughed at jokes I could not hear while I sat in silence they could not feel. My hands rested on the surface of the table. I traced the grains of the old oak with my fingertips. My husband had chosen this table decades ago. He said real wood lasted longer than any argument. I almost smiled at that memory. I wondered how he would react if he had seen what our family dinners had become. He would probably crack a joke loud enough to break the tension. I did not have his voice. All I had was quiet. Sophie called out from the couch. She asked if I had any sparkling water. I stood up and walked to the kitchen without answering. I opened the refrigerator and stared at the bottles. For a moment, I considered pretending I had none. Instead, I grabbed one and walked back. She did not say thank you. She kept her eyes on the screen as she took it from my hand like I was an invisible waitress. I returned to the kitchen and stood by the sink. My body leaned against the counter like it needed support. I looked at the window above the sink. The night outside was dark but honest. At least darkness did not pretend to care. I saw my reflection again. My face looked calm though my chest felt heavy. I whispered to myself that I was still here. I needed to remind myself of that fact because the people in my house clearly forgot. The show in the living room changed to a loud advertisement. Sophie complained about the commercials. She told Mark to upgrade my television next time so it could stream without breaks. She joked that my house was stuck in another century. Mark laughed politely. My own son laughed at my supposed incompetence. That sound hurt more than any sentence spoken tonight. I walked back into the dining room and turned off the lights. I did not ask if they were still eating. They had already abandoned the table long before I did. The darkness swallowed the room gently. It looked peaceful now that nobody was sitting there. I told them I was going to bed. Sophie replied with an absent-minded good night. Mark did not look up. The children waved without lifting their eyes from their tablets. I climbed the stairs slowly. Each step felt like a farewell. In my bedroom, I closed the door and finally allowed myself to breathe. I sat on the edge of the bed and removed my earrings with steady fingers. I placed them on the nightstand. My husband had given me those earrings for our 20th anniversary. I wondered how many years of loyalty could be undone by a single evening of disrespect. Apparently not many. I lay down, but sleep did not come. My thoughts kept replaying the moments from dinner. The way Sophie looked at me as if I were an obligation rather than a person. The way Mark avoided eye contact. The way my grandchildren saw me as background scenery in a house that was once filled with their laughter when they were little. I remembered when they used to run through the hallway calling my name with excitement. Now they barely acknowledged me. I tried to understand when that change happened. I could not find the exact moment. It must have been erased slowly like chalk washed away by rain. A question kept echoing in my mind. When did I become unnecessary in my own family story? That question did not make me cry this time. It made me think. That was new. Usually I would wipe my tears and tell myself to try harder next time. Tonight I did not want to try harder. I wanted to stop trying for people who did not try for me. I turned on the bedside lamp and reached for the drawer. Inside lay a folder. I had kept it there for months. I had prepared it long before tonight. I simply never had the courage to open it again. My fingers touched the cover. It felt cold yet steady, like the first step onto a bridge that had been waiting. I did not open it, not yet, but I rested my hand on it. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself that I was not powerless. I still had choices. I still had time. Downstairs I heard Sophie laughing again. It no longer stung. It sounded distant, almost like a radio playing in another neighborhood. I smiled to myself. A small smile, not of joy, not yet, but of recognition. I was not invisible. I was simply unseen by the wrong audience. Tonight was not the end of my silence. It was the end of my tolerance. Morning arrived pretending to be innocent. The sky wore soft blue like nothing painful had happened the night before. The sunlight touched my curtains politely as if asking permission to enter. Even the birds were chirping as if the universe had signed a contract to annoy me with optimism. I stood in the kitchen holding my cup of coffee like it was the last stable relationship in my life. Steam curled upward like a spiritual message. I waited for it to tell me something wise. It said nothing. I took a sip and let the bitterness stay on my tongue. At least coffee never lied about its taste. The house was finally quiet. No fake laughter from the television. No footsteps stomping around like invading soldiers. Just silence. Real silence. Not the kind forced upon me at the dinner table when they ignored my words. This silence belonged to me. It felt clean, wholly even. I glanced at the living room and saw the chaos they left behind. Pillows thrown on the floor. Crumbs decorating my rug like tragic confetti. A juice box tipped over and soaking into my fabric couch. A lovely souvenir from my grandchildren who apparently believe gravity is optional. There was a time when I would rush to clean everything before they woke up, just so they would think the house maintained itself magically. Today, I looked at the mess and thought perhaps I should leave it exactly as it was. A museum of disrespect. Exhibit A, the forgotten juice box of entitlement. I sat at the table and let my mind wander through old memories. Not the sweet ones. Those had already been used up. My brain had decided to replay the less pleasant episodes, a thoughtful decision. I remembered the day I slipped on the stairs. It was a small fall, nothing dramatic. I landed on my hip and sat there for a moment waiting for the pain to pass. Mark was upstairs. I called out to him. He shouted back asking if I was fine. I said I thought so. He replied good and stayed where he was. He did not come down. Apparently, motherhood comes with lifetime responsibilities, while sonhood comes with a 5-year expiration date. There was also the hospital incident. I had gone in for a minor test. They said I should not drive afterward, so I asked Mark if he could pick me up. He said he would. I waited. And waited. He texted me after 2 hours saying they had stopped for sushi because the children were hungry. I sat in a plastic chair with medical tape still on my arm and watched families walk by hugging each other. I remember thinking maybe I should ask one of the nurses to adopt me. They looked more attentive. Another memory surfaced uninvited. One afternoon, I overheard Sophie talking on the phone in the hallway. She said she felt like she was babysitting 2 children every time they visited me. One child was theirs. The other was apparently me. She said I was emotionally tiring because I asked too many questions. Imagine that. A grandmother asking her grandchildren about their lives. Exhausting behavior. I remember backing away quietly so she would not see me. I stood in my own kitchen holding a plate and feeling like I had just walked in on my own funeral. I took another sip of coffee and smirked at the absurdity of it all. If I truly were as burdensome as they claimed, then perhaps I should start charging fees. Emotional luggage storage. First hour free. Additional cost for sarcastic comments. They always told me they loved me. They said it like people say it to pets. Good girl, sit, stay, do not interfere. Do not expect affection unless scheduled in advance. Love without respect is just polite control. I had confused courtesy for care. That was my mistake. I thought if I cooked more meals and smiled more often, they would see my worth again. Instead, they saw convenience. A free babysitter with working legs and a functioning stove. My mind drifted to darker curiosity. I wondered what would happen if one day I simply vanished. Would they notice immediately, or would they first assume I was napping for a concerningly long time? It would be amusing if they tried calling me and my voicemail replied with something dramatic like, "Sorry, I cannot come to the phone. I am currently haunting someone more appreciative." The funny thing is that I do not even want revenge. I do not want them to suffer. I simply want them to realize I am not furniture. I am not an appliance that stays silent until required. I am human. That used to be enough. I looked at the stairs where they had walked past me last night without looking. They climbed those steps like royalty ascending a throne while I stood there like background decoration. I pressed my palm flat on the table and whispered a sentence that felt heavier than any shout. Never again. No more begging for respect. No more hoping for crumbs of affection. If they truly see me as a burden, then it is time I become one that they cannot carry. I finished my coffee. I placed the empty cup in the sink without rinsing it, a rebellious act. Perhaps I would leave it there as a reminder that I still exist. Then I turned toward the drawer where the folder rested, my lifeboat, my exit plan. I walked toward it slowly, not with fear, with certainty. Each step felt like reclaiming territory, my own house, my own life. My fingers touched the drawer handle. Cold. Firm like truth itself. I pulled it open, enough remembering. It was time to act. I did not open the folder immediately. I rested my hand on it like one might rest a palm on the shoulder of an old friend. Calm, certain, familiar. People think breaking points are loud. They imagine screaming, plates shattering against walls, dramatic exits. Mine was silent, like a lock clicking into place. I left the drawer open and walked back to the kitchen sink. I turned on the faucet and watched the water run. It flowed without hesitation. No stalling, no asking permission, just movement. I envied it. I rinsed the cup slowly and placed it upside down on the rack. Simple task, yet it felt like clearing space. Not just in the kitchen, in my mind. Voices drifted from upstairs, the children arguing about television shows. Sophie telling them to pack their things, Mark telling her to lower her voice because I might hear. I almost laughed. As if my hearing had not been perfect every time they whispered about me like I was already gone. Their steps echoed down the stairs. They walked into the kitchen like entitled tourists checking out of a disappointing hotel. Sophie smiled politely. She thanked me for the evening. She said the meal was lovely. I wondered if she practiced hypocrisy in front of a mirror. Mark hugged me lightly. His arms barely touched me, like I was made of glass. Or perhaps he was afraid kindness might be misinterpreted as attachment. He said they would visit again soon. I knew soon meant never until they needed something. The children waved without looking up from their screens. They said bye grandma with voices that could have just as easily been saying bye lamp. The door closed behind them. Silence. Real silence again. I did not cry. Tears would have been wasted on people who measured affection in obligations. I walked to the living room and stood among the remains of their presence. Crushed chips underfoot. A sweater left on the couch. A toy left on the floor. Evidence of existence. Temporary, careless. I picked up the toy and placed it on the table. It was a small plastic dinosaur with one missing leg. It wobbled when I stood it up. I stared at it longer than I expected, a broken creature trying to stand straight. I felt an odd kinship with it. I whispered to it softly, "At least you do not pretend to be whole." I almost set it on fire out of poetic symbolism, but I placed it back gently. Even plastic deserved more respect than I had been given. I walked to the hallway mirror and studied myself. No tears, no tremble. My reflection looked awake. I had not seen that expression in a long time. Not sadness, not anger, awareness. I spoke aloud to my reflection. "You have spent years being grateful for crumbs. Time to bake your own bread." The house felt colder without them, but it was an honest cold, not the subtle frost of indifference that had filled it when they were here. I went back to the drawer and lifted the folder. It had weight, real weight. Decisions often do. I carried it to the dining table where last night's disaster had taken place. I sat at the head of the table, my seat, my rightful place. I opened the folder. Documents stared back at me, legal contracts, property statements. Letters drafted but never sent, plans, real plans, proof that a quieter version of me had already started building an escape while the louder world kept drowning her out. I read through the pages one by one. Each paragraph felt like oxygen. I had thought this folder was just preparation, a just in case. I realized now it was prophecy. I ran my finger along the signature line. It waited for me like an invitation. I did not pick up the pen yet, not out of doubt, out of reverence. Actions like this deserved ceremony. I closed the folder and held it against my chest. It felt like armor. I stood up and walked through the house slowly, one last inspection of the battlefield. The kitchen where I had fed generations. The hallway where my laughter once echoed. The living room where I had become invisible. The staircase where I had stood like an unwanted specter watching my family pretend not to see me. I stopped in front of a family photo hanging on the wall. We were all smiling. Forced smiles, the kind photographers beg for when joy refuses to cooperate. I touched my own face in the picture. She looked hopeful, poor thing. I whispered to the photo, "Do not worry, I am rescuing you." Then I turned away. The decision had already been made the moment they walked into my house last night and treated me like a background prop. They had taught me something valuable. If they can live without me, then I can live without them. I sat with the folder in front of me like it was a living thing. It was not heavy, yet it felt like holding every insult I had ever swallowed. Every moment I chose silence instead of confrontation. Every time I convinced myself that patience would eventually be rewarded. Patience is a graceful thing until it turns into self-abandonment. I opened the folder slowly, not because I doubted myself, but because I wanted to absorb the gravity of this moment. There was a strange kind of peace in it, a quiet certainty I had never felt before. I scanned through the documents I had prepared months ago when I first allowed the thought of escape to exist in my mind. Back then, I had called it a precaution, a safety net, something I would probably never use. Now it was no longer a backup plan. It was my lifeline. I reached for my phone. My hand did not hesitate, not this time. I scrolled past Mark's name without stopping. Past Sophie's. Past the group chat they had made for family updates where I was allowed to answer only when spoken to. I found the name I was looking for. Richard Hale, my lawyer, a man who spoke softly but with conviction, the opposite of Sophie who spoke loudly with emptiness. I tapped his name. The phone rang twice. He answered with a simple greeting. I did not waste time. "It is time," I said. Those 3 words tasted like steel on my tongue. There was no surprise in his silence, only acknowledgement. "Very well," he replied. "Shall I arrange everything?" "Yes. I will send you the meeting details by tonight." "Thank you." I ended the call. No trembling, no guilt, no lingering urge to reconsider. The decision had been made long before I spoke the words. All that changed today was that I finally admitted it out loud. I put the phone down and leaned back in my chair. The ceiling above me looked the same as it always had, yet I felt as if the entire house exhaled with me, as if it had been holding its breath too, waiting for me to finally say enough. I stood and walked to the mirror in the hallway. I looked at myself, really looked. Same face, same lines, same woman, but different eyes. For years they had been full of questions. Now they held answers. I touched the edge of the mirror gently. "You were not weak," I whispered to my reflection. "You were accommodating, that is not the same." I turned away and walked through the house slowly, letting my fingers brush against the walls. Each room held memories, some warm, many bitter, yet none of them were enough to chain me anymore. I went back to the kitchen, placed the folder on the counter, and began boiling water for tea. Not because I needed it, because rituals matter when one is about to become someone new. As the kettle whistled, I felt something I had not felt in a long time: anticipation, not fear of what they would say, curiosity of how they would react. They would not see it coming. They believed I would stay forever because I always had. They believed kindness meant surrender. They believed I would rather suffer than disrupt the peace. They never understood that peace without respect is just controlled humiliation. I poured the tea into my cup and held it between my palms. Tomorrow, movement would begin. Tonight, stillness, but not the stillness of a woman who waits. The stillness of a woman who prepares. I took a sip and closed my eyes. Let them think I am predictable. Let them assume I am soft. It will make the moment of their realization so much sharper. I opened my eyes and looked at the folder again. The future was already written. All I had to do now was sign it into reality, and I would. Very soon. I did not sleep that night. Not because I was troubled, but because I did not want to waste a single moment of clarity. I lay in bed with my eyes open, listening to the sound of the house breathing around me. It was strange to think that soon it would breathe without me. Stranger still to realize that I did not feel sadness at that thought. Only relief. At dawn, I got up and walked through the house barefoot. The floor was cold, but my body felt warm, as if purpose itself was keeping me alive. I made breakfast out of habit even though there was nobody to serve. Toast, eggs, and a bowl of berries arranged neatly on a plate I did not intend to touch. Then I wrapped it up and placed it in the fridge. Perhaps I would eat it later. Perhaps I would throw it away. Either way, food was not my focus today. Today was for planning. I fetched a notebook from the drawer. A blank one I had been saving for a project I never started. How fitting that I would use it now to draft the end of one life and the beginning of another. I sat at the table and wrote down everything I needed to do, not in a frantic rush. Calmly, precisely, like a general preparing for an elegant war. Call the moving company, retrieve spare keys, remove personal documents from drawers, gather old photographs, decide what stays, decide what comes with me. Decide what deserves to be destroyed. I paused at that line. Destroyed. There were things in this house that belonged to another version of me, a woman who apologized for taking up space, a woman who believed her worth depended on being useful, a woman who accepted crumbs and called them blessings. That woman was gone now, and the objects she had clung to no longer held power. I stood and walked to the hallway closet where I kept a box of old cards. Birthday messages from Mark filled with generic affection. Thank you notes from Sophie that sounded like they had been copied from a charity pamphlet. Drawings from the grandchildren, some sweet, some dismissive. One of them once gave me a picture of a stick figure labeled Grandma with a cane twice my height. They laughed when they gave it to me. I laughed too. That was my mistake. I picked up the box and carried it to the fireplace. I sat on the floor and opened it slowly. Paper memories, some still kind. Others coated in pity. I touched each one for a second before deciding its fate. I kept a few that came from genuine love. The rest I fed to the flames one by one. The paper curled and turned black. Flames flickered like applause. When the last card burned, I dusted the ashes off my hands and stood. No more sentimental chains. I spent the next hour sorting through drawers. I moved quietly, almost reverently. Not out of sorrow, but out of respect for who I had been. I packed clothes I needed. Left those I did not. I chose only what mattered for the woman I was becoming, not the one they remembered. While I worked, my phone buzzed with a message. From Mark. Morning, Mom. Thanks for dinner. Sorry if we were tired last night. Hope you are well. Tired. That was always the excuse. They were always tired. Too tired to listen. Too tired to help. Too tired to care. Interesting how exhaustion only ever applied to them and never to the person who gave them everything. I did not reply. He sent another. We will visit again soon. I smiled. No, they would not here, not ever again. I put the phone in a drawer and returned to packing. The sun rose higher, casting long beams across the floor. Each beam looked like a path leading outward, not backward, not inward, forward. At noon, I made myself lunch, not a full meal, just a sandwich. Simple, satisfying. I sat by the window while I ate and watched people on the street going about their lives. For years, I believed mine revolved around others. Today, I watched strangers and thought how peaceful it must be to live without asking permission. After lunch, I cleaned the kitchen, not because I expected guests, because I wanted to leave this place spotless when I finally closed the door behind me. Let them return one day and find everything perfect yet empty. Let them stand in silence and feel absence settle over them like dust. The afternoon passed in quiet movement. I organized documents, labeled boxes, and stacked them neatly near the back door. With every item I placed aside, the house felt less like a home and more like a shell, and I felt lighter. By evening, I had reduced my life to 3 suitcases and 1 folder. I made tea again and sat at the table. The house was quiet, gentle, patient. Tomorrow I would leave. Tonight I allowed myself one final moment of reflection. I looked around the kitchen. Every corner held a story, some I would miss. Many I would not. I placed my hand on the table and whispered into the silence. You were good to me, but I am done waiting for others to be. I moved through the house like a shadow that finally realized it could choose where to fall. Every step I took was deliberate, not hesitant. I did not rush. I did not panic. I simply removed myself piece by piece as if I were unstitching my own existence from this place. It was astonishing how many things could be packed into silence. I started with the drawers. Birth certificates, bank documents, medical papers, letters that once meant something but now only reminded me how easy it was for affection to expire. I placed everything in a neat stack inside a small suitcase, not a large one. I did not need much. I had spent too long believing that the more I owned, the more grounded I would feel. Now I realized weight was just another disguise for imprisonment. The house creaked behind me as I worked, like it sensed what was happening. Maybe it was mourning me already, or maybe it was relieved too. While I was organizing the documents in the study room, my phone buzzed on the table. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the name. Mark. I let it ring until it stopped. A voice message followed. I pressed play, not because I wanted to hear it, but because I needed to prove to myself that even his apologies could no longer touch me. His voice came through with that practiced softness he used whenever he needed to sound caring without committing to the effort. Hey Mom, just checking in. We were talking about you earlier. Sophie was a bit worried you seemed tired lately. Maybe we should help you plan for the future, something more manageable for you. Manageable. Such a considerate way of saying remove yourself from our way. I deleted the message without replying. 10 minutes later, another notification. This time from Sophie. She had sent an audio file. I placed the phone face down on the table and let it play while I stacked some books into a box. Sophie's voice filled the room with that falsely cheerful tone she used when she believed she was being diplomatic. Andrea, I was thinking, and please don't take this the wrong way, but Mark and I were talking about how much work it must be for you to keep the house running. Maybe it would be easier for everyone if we discussed, long-term plans for the property. We want to make sure things are in order so you don't have to worry about it later. I froze halfway through lifting a book. Property, in order, not worry about it later. I had become a logistical inconvenience. A task to be resolved, not a person, a file to be processed. Then came the worst part. She must have thought she muted herself, but she didn't. Her voice lowered as she spoke to someone beside her. Likely Mark. She whispered, don't worry. Once she moves out or, passes, the house will be technically ours. We can renovate it, maybe sell it. This old place could be worth something if fixed properly. Then faintly I heard one of my grandchildren in the background, a small voice. Curious, innocent, or perhaps not. Grandma can't do anything anyway. She just sits there. They laughed. I stood perfectly still. Not a muscle moved. Not a breath changed. Not a tear fell. I simply stood there listening to my legacy. A woman who just sits there. Funny, they said it like it was harmless, like it was trivial. They never realized how much damage careless words could do when spoken in rooms where love once lived. I turned the audio off and placed the phone on the table with care. I did not slam it. I did not curse or shout. I had already wasted too much sound on people who never listened. Instead, I spoke to the empty room. They believe I am powerless. The room did not answer, but something inside me did. Good, let them. Let them believe they are safe. Let them believe I will do nothing. Their underestimation would be the softest pillow I would ever sleep on. I continued packing, not frantically, elegantly. I folded clothes I actually liked. I threw away those I had worn simply because Sophie once commented they made me look presentable. I kept a single photograph of my husband, not because I needed to remember him, because I wanted him to witness what I was about to do. At one point, I found an old birthday card from Mark. He must have been 8. His handwriting was messy and heartfelt. I traced my fingers over the faded ink and whispered to the child he once was, I loved you. You loved me. We were both honest then. I put that card gently into my suitcase. Everything else went into the bin. By late afternoon, the house felt less familiar. Not because I was leaving it, because it was no longer mine. It had already been claimed in their imaginations. They had redesigned it mentally, repainted it, replaced my furniture with their ideas. In their minds, I was already a ghost haunting a property they had plans for. They wanted me gone before I was gone. They would get their wish, but not in the way they intended. I sat down beside the window and watched the sunlight stretch across the floorboards. The golden glow made everything look peaceful. If someone walked in now, they might think I was resting. They would not see the war happening quietly at this table. I rested my hands on the suitcase beside me. It was almost full. I whispered to the house, to the walls, to the ghosts of laughter I used to hear here. I am not leaving because you stopped being mine. I am leaving because I stopped being theirs. Night came slowly. I did not turn on the lights. I let the darkness rest around me like a cloak. In silence, I smiled. This was no longer a house. It was a witness. And soon, it would be a memory. I did not sleep. I stayed in the chair by the window until the first suggestion of dawn touched the glass. The house was quiet in that fragile way that only exists right before morning, when night is not ready to leave and day has not fully arrived. That thin space between worlds. It suited me. At 6, I stood and made coffee, not out of habit, out of intention. I wanted to taste the last morning I would ever have here without bitterness. So I brewed it slowly, inhaled the familiar scent rising from the cup, and let it warm my hands like a farewell handshake. As I drank, I walked through each room one last time before the sun fully claimed the walls. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway where Mark used to run as a child. I remembered the sound of his laughter echoing there as he slid across the floor in socks. I had stayed up late polishing that floor the night before a family visit once so it would look perfect when they arrived. Nobody noticed, but I remembered how proud I felt. It was almost funny now. How I had spent years polishing things that dulled the moment someone else touched them. By 7, I was dressed, not in my usual soft clothes. I wore something I hadn't worn in years, a fitted navy coat, a clean blouse, shoes with heels, clothes that made noise when I walked, clothes that said I was not invisible. I picked up my phone and called Richard. He answered on the second ring. "Morning, Andrea, still ready." "Still ready," I replied. He paused as if expecting hesitation. "Good, I'll have everything arranged. You'll just need to sign." Sign, such a small word, such a heavy act. After the call, I went to the dining room and opened the folder containing the paperwork he had sent me last week. Transfer documents, trust agreements, sale authorizations. My name was everywhere. Soon, it would be erased in certain places, placed elsewhere with stronger walls. They would look for me in this house and find nothing but legal signatures telling them they had no claim to anything. I traced the edge of the first document with my fingertip before closing the folder. Not yet. It was not time to sign. Not until I had formally separated my spirit from this place, not just my belongings. I decided to take one final walk outside. I stepped into the yard and felt the chill of the morning air kiss my face. The grass was damp with dew. I bent down and touched it lightly. Soft, alive, untainted by expectation. I walked to the edge of the fence and leaned my hands against it, staring at the quiet street. A delivery truck passed by slowly. A man walked his dog. No one looked at me. No one knew that today, in this ordinary morning, someone was slipping quietly out of one life and into another. That anonymity comforted me. On my way back in, my foot brushed against something by the door. One of the small potted plants I kept on the porch. It had wilted slightly from neglect these past days. I crouched down and touched its leaves gently. "I used to water you every morning," I whispered, even when nobody watered me. I stood and left it there without guilt. Later in the day, I called the moving company. A calm male voice confirmed the pickup time. No questions, no curiosity. When he asked where to deliver the boxes, I said they would be going to storage for now. He said that was fine. He did not ask why. He did not imply anything. It felt good to speak to someone who saw me as a customer instead of a burden. By noon, I had packed almost everything. The suitcase by the door was closed. The boxes were lined up neatly against the hallway wall. Only a few things remained: the teacup on the table, the blanket on the couch, the framed picture on the wall. I would leave them for last. Final gestures. I sat again at the table and allowed myself one final indulgence. Memory, not the soft kind that cradles you, the sharp kind that wakes you. I remembered the day Sophie first visited this house. She had walked through each room with polite admiration, complimenting the decor in that rehearsed tone people use at open houses. She said it was charming. Quaint. She had smiled at me sweetly before turning to Mark and whispering, loud enough for me to hear, "We could fix it up one day. Maybe knock down a few walls. It has potential, meaning it was not good enough as it was." I had stood there with cookies in my hand and felt like furniture. Now, as I sat here surrounded by packed boxes, I whispered into the empty room, "You never saw me. You saw square footage." Outside, a bird landed on the windowsill. It tilted its head, studying me. For a brief moment, I imagined it asking, "Are you leaving?" "Yes," I answered aloud. "I am." I stood and placed my hand flat against the wall. Goodbye, not to the house, but to the woman who used to live here. I did not intend to be present when they returned. I did not want a confrontation. I did not want drama, I wanted distance. Clean, unmessy separation. Like slipping out of a room before anyone noticed I had been there at all. That had always been my strength. Moving quietly, enduring quietly, leaving quietly. Only this time, my silence would not be mistaken for weakness. It would be mistaken for absence. Until they realized it was strategy. The day before the final papers were to be signed, I received a message from Mark. "We are dropping by tomorrow morning. The kids want to see you." I laughed when I read it, not out loud, just a soft exhale that held too much history. They never asked, they announced, they never visited me. They arrived at a place they considered an extension of themselves. I typed 3 words, "I will be out." He responded with a thumbs up. A thumbs up. That was the level of courtesy I commanded now. The morning arrived soft like every other morning, except this one was armed. My bags were packed. My coat was on. The folder of legal documents rested in my purse like a loaded weapon. I walked to the front door slowly, savoring the rhythm of my footsteps on the floorboards. This house no longer echoed when I walked. It absorbed me quietly. A final act of discretion. Outside, the sky was pale and calm. I locked the door behind me and held the key in my hand for a long second. Then I placed it in my pocket and walked away without looking back. I did not go far, not yet. I stood at the end of the street, far enough to be unseen but close enough to witness. I was not being sentimental. I simply wanted to see what ignorance looked like before it fractured. I did not wait long. Their car appeared at the far end of the road, moving casually, leisurely, as if the world waited for them. They parked crookedly, half blocking my mailbox. Sophie stepped out first, adjusting her sunglasses though the sky was overcast. Mark came around the other side, calling out something to the kids in the back. Their voices floated through the open windows. Hi, unbothered, entitled. They walked to the front door without hesitation. Sophie reached for the handle and tried to turn it. It did not move. She frowned and tried again. Mark stepped forward, confused. He pulled at the handle harder. Locked. I watched his expression flicker. Confusion, annoyance, mild disbelief. As if the idea of this door refusing him was fundamentally absurd, he knocked on the door loudly. "Mom, you home?" Silence. Sophie muttered something under her breath and knocked harder. "Andrea, we know you are in there." The children were still in the car. I could hear music playing from the speakers, something upbeat, something careless. It contrasted beautifully with the tension growing at my doorstep. Mark pulled out his phone and called. I felt the vibration in my pocket. I let it ring. Sophie knocked again. Harder, her voice sharpened. "Andrea, this is not funny. Open the door, open the door." How many times had they told me that before? Open the door, open your wallet, open your schedule, open your patience. Open your home, always open, now closed. Mark stepped back, staring at the door as if it had betrayed him. He said something to Sophie. I could not hear it, but I could read his lips. Maybe she went out. Sophie scoffed. "She does not go anywhere," I smiled. Mark tried calling again, then a third time, each ring unanswered. Each ring a quiet declaration that I no longer belonged to them. At last, Sophie turned and headed back to the car. She pulled out her phone and started typing furiously, probably composing some passive-aggressive message drenched in false concern. I did not need to read it to know how it would sound. "We are worried. This is not like you. Please respond." Translation: "How dare you inconvenience us?" Mark walked around the side of the house, checking the windows. He rattled one of them, then another. When they did not budge, frustration finally cracked through his calm. "Why would she lock everything? Because I am no longer yours to enter." I watched him stand still, breathing heavily, his hands on his hips. For a moment, he looked like a child. Not my child, just a child, lost and confused. Sophie yelled his name from the car. He ignored her, then I saw it. The moment comprehension dawned. Slow. Reluctant, terrifying. He reached down, picked up the envelope taped neatly beside the door, and tore it from the wall. Not a note, not an apology, official papers. His shoulders stiffened. He read. Then he stopped moving entirely. I did not see his face. I did not need to. I could feel the silence that swallowed him. It was the silence of realization, of consequence, of being denied access to something he had assumed was unconditionally his. I turned away. I did not want to watch what came next. This was not vengeance. This was correction. I did not deserve to witness this moment as a villain, nor as a victor. I watched it merely as a witness to cause and effect. I stayed behind the hedge, silent, motionless, as if I were carved from the same stone that held the pavement beneath my feet. 3 months ago, I would have been trembling at the idea of being caught watching my own family unravel. But today, I stood with the stillness of a monument, unshaken, because I was not doing anything to them. They were simply seeing themselves without my cushioning presence. Sophie was the first to unravel. She stormed across the lawn like a queen who discovered someone had dared sit on her throne. Her heels dug into the earth with every step, stabbing the soil as if she could injure the ground for daring to exist beneath her. She marched toward the patrol car that had just parked at the curb and launched into a monologue so violent that even the engine seemed to quiet itself to listen. Her hands flew wildly as she pointed at the house, then at Mark, then at the door as if language alone could set the world back into its proper hierarchy. She spoke in rapid, frantic bursts. Words like stolen and manipulation and mentally unstable floated through the air with such sharpness I could almost see them slicing the space between them. The officer, however, did not flinch. He stood with his notepad, nodding occasionally, not in agreement but in acknowledgement of sound. He waited for her to finish. She never did. He had to lift a hand politely to interrupt. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset." "No, you don't," she snapped. He waited a beat, then continued. "But this appears to be a civil or legal matter, not a criminal one." She laughed at him, not with amusement, with disbelief. She pointed again at the house. "She changed the locks, without telling us. She's holding our property hostage. That's illegal." The officer turned to Mark. "Sir, is your name on the deed?" Mark hesitated. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "No," but the officer looked back at Sophie. Her expression faltered for the first time. "So this is her house?" he asked simply. Sophie swallowed. "Yes, but she's not in her right mind. She's being manipulated. Someone made her do this. She would never do this on her own. They always say that about people who finally stop obeying." The officer nodded slowly, then knelt to pick up one of the torn paper fragments from the ground. He examined it closely. He called something into his radio. He listened. He stood. His face remained unchanged. "Based on the information on this document and what dispatch is confirming, it seems the property transfer is legally recorded. Your mother is within her rights to deny access." Sophie stared at him as though he had just spoken in tongues. She shook her head. "So you're not going to do anything?" He shifted slightly. His patience had been used many times before and was now being spent again, carefully but firmly. "There is nothing to do. If you have concerns, take it to court. But as far as the law is concerned, this is her property, not yours." Sophie stood very still. Then, without warning, she let out a sound that was not quite a scream and not quite a sob. A strange in-between howl, as if a wild animal had just discovered its cage had no key. She turned and slammed her palm against the front door, over and over, like she could force the wood to feel her rage. "Open the door. Open it right now. You can't do this to us. Us. Not her. Not him. Us." As if I had wronged a united front instead of freeing myself from a silent execution. The children were now watching from inside the car, their heads tilted. Confused, they had never seen their parents denied anything before. This was their first encounter with consequences. They looked at their mother like she had malfunctioned. At their father like he had failed to follow a script. Mark finally moved. He walked slowly toward Sophie and placed a hand on her shoulder. Not to comfort. To anchor. She shrugged it off so violently that his hand nearly slipped. He tried again. She jerked away. "Don't touch me. You let this happen. You let her do this." He stared at her, shocked, as if the person he married had suddenly revealed herself to be a stranger. She turned that fury back toward the house. "You think you can just disappear? You think you can just walk away after everything we've done for you? Everything we've done for you." A phrase I had heard in different formats for years. Every errand counted twice. Every favor turned into a lifelong debt. Every ride to the doctor recounted like a heroic rescue. Everything we've done for you, as though my decades of sacrifice had been erased the moment I stopped providing. The officer spoke again, quieter this time. "If she's not here, there's nothing more we can do. I advise you to leave before this becomes trespassing." Sophie stared at him, then at the house, then at Mark. Then she turned abruptly and stalked back to the car. She slammed the door so hard the glass rattled. The children jumped. Mark lingered by the steps for one last moment, his shoulders slumped like a flag left out in rain. He looked at the door as if it might open if he wished hard enough. But it didn't. He walked back to the car, slower than he had arrived. He sat down without a word. Sophie said something to him, but he did not respond. She hit the steering wheel. He still did not respond. The car started. The car drove away. I watched until the taillights disappeared. Only then did I step out from behind the hedge. I walked slowly toward the house, not to re-enter but to acknowledge it one last time as a battlefield newly claimed. The door stood silent, proud in its refusal. The torn paper lay scattered across the path like surrendered flags. I crouched and picked up one fragment. My signature was on it, firm, legible. A final confirmation that I had stopped apologizing for existing. I did not keep the fragment. I let the wind take it, then I turned and walked away again. This time I did not look back, not because I was afraid of being caught, but because there was nothing left in that direction worth seeing. I did not go straight to my new place. I could have. The paperwork was done. The key was already waiting with Richard. The address was printed clearly on the envelope tucked inside my purse. But I was not ready to walk into solitude just yet, not that I felt lonely. I simply knew that silence after liberation can feel too sharp if entered too suddenly, like stepping from a burning room into an ocean. Relief can drown you if taken without transition, so I went to Claire's. She opened the door before I even knocked. She must have been watching through the window because she pulled me into the house as if I were a fugitive she needed to hide. Her embrace was brief but firm. She did not ask if I was all right. She knew I was. She only said, quietly, "Did they find out?" I nodded. She smirked, "Good." I set my suitcase down by the couch and felt a strange sensation. Not discomfort, not awkwardness, more like the absence of tension. I was standing in a house where nothing was expected of me, no role assigned, no script handed. I was simply a presence. It felt so foreign I almost did not trust it. Claire made tea without asking me what I wanted. She placed the cup in my hands like an offering. "To your resurrection," she said. I laughed, not loudly, but honestly. We sat in the living room in companionable quiet. Her house smelled faintly of cinnamon and old books. She always kept the windows cracked open, letting in just enough breeze to make the curtains sway. The sound of them brushing against the wall was gentler than any music. After a while, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I let it. Then it buzzed again, and again. I did not take it out. Claire glanced at me. "You want me to throw that into the river?" "Not yet," I said. She nodded, understanding. Silence returned. When I finally pulled my phone out, there were 12 missed calls from Mark and 6 from Sophie. No voicemails from Sophie. She preferred to perform live, but Mark had left one. I pressed play only because curiosity outweighed irritation. His voice was shaky. He tried to sound calm, but panic leaked through every syllable. "Mom, I do not know what is happening. Sophie is, I just need to know you are okay. Can you please call me back, please? We can talk about this. We can fix it." Fix it, as if this were a broken appliance, as if I were a leaky pipe. I deleted the message and placed the phone face down on the table. Claire sipped her tea without looking at me. Then she said, "If you answer him now, they win." I smiled faintly. "I know." The phone buzzed again. This time a text, from Sophie. "How could you do this to us?" There it was, us, again, as if I had betrayed a nation rather than removed myself from a dictatorship. Another message followed. "People online are already talking about it." Is that what you wanted? To humiliate us? So she had already begun the performance, the public grieving, the curated tragedy. I pictured her typing furiously, framing herself as the abandoned saint who took care of a cruel mother-in-law. I could almost hear her saying I always tried to include her. I treated her like my own mother. I do not know why she is doing this to us. They would call me ungrateful. They would call me unstable. They would say I had been manipulated. They would say anything except the truth, that I had simply stopped tolerating their entitlement. I turned the phone off completely. Claire leaned back in her chair and stretched like a cat. "So, what's next?" I looked at her. The question wrapped itself around me like dawn. Next was mine to define, for the first time in decades. I said softly, "I want to learn how to exist without permission." Claire raised her cup. "Then let today be lesson 1. We clinked our cups like warriors toasting before a peaceful war. Later, when I went to the guest room she had prepared, I opened my suitcase and stared at the few belongings I had chosen to carry into my next life. Clothes, papers, the photograph of my husband, the birthday card from the boy Mark used to be. I touched the edges of the card and whispered he would have been proud, not of the act, but of the courage. I lay in the bed and closed my eyes. The mattress was softer than mine had been. The pillows smelled unfamiliar, yet I fell asleep faster than I had in years. No guilt, no fear, just rest. I woke up to sunlight instead of obligation. That in itself felt like a luxury. Claire had already left for work, but she'd prepared breakfast and stuck a note to the fridge that said, "Eat slowly. You've earned it." I smiled as I buttered my toast. It had been a long time since someone did something for me without expecting applause. After breakfast, I turned my phone on for the first time since the night before. It lit up like an emergency beacon. 32 notifications, 15 missed calls, 9 voice messages. I opened none of them. I went straight to the news app instead. There it was. A local community forum headline: Woman abandons family, leaves them locked out of home, legal or cruel? Underneath was a deliberately blurred photo of my house and a car in the driveway. It was unmistakably Sophie's vehicle. She must have sent it in. The caption beneath the photo read, "Daughter-in-law claims elderly mother-in-law disappeared suddenly after transferring property. Says they are heartbroken and concerned for her safety." Concerned for my safety. How poetic. I clicked on the comment section. Dozens of people who knew nothing about me had already turned it into a public trial. How could someone do that to their own son? Maybe the daughter-in-law was mean, or maybe the old lady was manipulative. You never know. Sounds like dementia. Sounds like she finally snapped. I scrolled without feeling anything. It was like watching people argue about the weather in a country I no longer lived in. Then I found Sophie's own post. She had written a lengthy caption above a carefully selected picture, an old photo of me holding one of the grandchildren as a baby. She had chosen a flattering image of herself beside me, smiling sweetly. The kind of photo that suggested harmony. Her caption read, "I never wanted to make this public, but I am truly heartbroken. We have always loved and cared for Andrea as our own. We included her in every holiday and outing. We offered to help with the house. We even suggested she move in with us. But instead, she sold her home in secret, locked us out, and disappeared without a word. We just want to know she's safe. If anyone has seen her, please let us know. We love you, Andrea. Please come home. Come home." A phrase both tender and tyrannical. I didn't react. I simply set the phone down and finished my tea. An hour later, Mark called again. I ignored it. He sent a message. "They are turning this into something ugly. Please respond so I can calm things down." Calm things down, meaning come back and let Sophie spin the story her way, meaning return to your assigned role so we can all continue pretending. I turned off the phone again. Claire came home early that afternoon. She tossed her bag on the floor and said, "So, have they started the pity parade?" I nodded. She rolled her eyes. "Let them march. You don't owe them applause." We spent the afternoon reorganizing her bookshelves. It was mundane work but soothing. Each book I placed felt like another piece of order returning to my life. In the evening, as the sun dipped low, my phone buzzed again. I let it ring, then it buzzed a second time, and a third. Finally, I checked the caller ID. It was one of the grandchildren. Not the oldest, the middle one. 11 years old. I hesitated. Something in me softened, not with regret but with curiosity. I answered. "Grandma," his voice was small. Unsure. "Yes," I said. "Where are you?" "Somewhere peaceful." There was a pause. "Why did you lock us out?" I considered his question. He was not angry, just confused. I said calmly, "Because it was never your house." Silence. Then, quietly, "But Dad said it would be someday." "Maybe," I replied, "if he became someone who deserved it." Didn't respond. I could hear breathing. Finally, he whispered, "Grandma, were we bad?" The question cut deep. Not because it hurt me, but because it revealed how children absorb guilt meant for adults. "No," I said. "You were simply watching how others behaved." Another pause. "Will you come back?" No, he did not cry. He did not argue. He only said softly, "Okay." Then, after a moment, he added, "Can I still call you?" I felt something warm move through me. Not sadness, something like hope. "Yes. But only if you call because you want to. Not because someone tells you to." "Okay." The line went quiet. Then he spoke one last time. "Grandma, yes, I'm glad you went somewhere peaceful." I closed my eyes. I let the silence rest between us. Then the call ended. I kept the phone in my hand for a long time before setting it down. Not everything I left behind was lost. Some things were simply waiting to grow. I knew they would come, not because they wanted reconciliation. Not because regret had bloomed in their hearts. They would come because I had removed myself from their control, and people like them could not rest while anything remained outside their grasp. They would come not to apologize, but to negotiate ownership of a narrative they thought belonged to them. They arrived in the late afternoon. Claire and I were in the kitchen, slicing fruit in comfortable silence, when her head lifted slightly. "They're here," she said. I didn't ask how she knew. The tone of an engine desperate to arrive carries a frequency only certain ears can catch. I set down the knife and wiped my hands on a towel. I did not rush to the door. I was not summoned. I chose my own timing now. They knocked hard, not politely, not tentatively. They knocked like debt collectors. Claire glanced at me. Her eyes asked, "Do you want me to answer?" "No," I said. "I want them to see me, calm, standing." I walked to the door and opened it. There they were. Sophie, rigid, lips tight to keep from cracking. Mark, tired, shoulders sagging as if he had been carrying an invisible weight he only now realized had always been his. For a moment, none of us spoke. The silence stood between us like a wall made of glass. They could see me. They could not reach me. Sophie was the first to break. "Andrea, what are you doing?" A fascinating question to ask someone standing calmly in a doorway. She continued without waiting for an answer. "Is this really how you want things to end? Hiding here, making us look like monsters online? You made yourselves look like monsters," I said softly. I simply stepped out of frame. Mark flinched slightly. Sophie narrowed her eyes. "We came to talk, face to face. Like family, I repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. Interesting choice." Mark stepped forward. "Mom, please, this has gone too far. People are talking. The kids are confused. We just need to," he hesitated, searching for the right phrase. "Fix this," I almost smiled. "There is nothing to fix, I am not broken." Sophie scoffed, frustration boiling over. "This is ridiculous. You blindsided us. You humiliated us. Do you have any idea what people are saying?" "Yes, and I don't care." She froze, stunned. She had expected guilt, maybe even tears. But indifference? That was a language she did not understand. She switched tactics. "We took care of you. We included you. We tried to help, and this is how you repay us." I tilted my head. Then, without a word, I turned and walked back into the living room. They hesitated, unsure if they were allowed to enter. I did not invite them, but I did not close the door either. They followed not because they were welcome, but because they could not stand being shut out again. I went to the side table and opened the drawer. Inside, neatly arranged, was a small collection of printed messages and one USB stick. Evidence. I held them in my hand, not dramatically, just firmly. "You say you helped me, you say you cared, yet you also said this." I read aloud slowly, clearly. "Once she moves out or passes, the house will be technically ours. We could renovate it, maybe sell it. This old place could be worth something if fixed properly." Sophie went pale. Mark closed his eyes. I continued. "Grandma can't do anything anyway. She just sits there." My hand did not shake. I looked at them. I may have been silent all these years, but I was not deaf. Sophie opened her mouth. No words came out. Her eyes darted to Mark as if pleading for him to unravel this disaster. But he could not. He stared at the floor. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet. "Mom, I didn't mean I never wanted." I cut him off gently. "You didn't want to stop it either." Silence again. This time heavy. I straightened my posture. "You don't get to rewrite history because you're uncomfortable with how it reads." Sophie looked like she might cry, or break, or explode. I felt nothing. This was not revenge. This was revelation. I stepped back toward the doorway. "This is not your home, not anymore, not ever again." Mark lifted his head. "So that's it?" "Yes," I said, "that's it." They stood there, unsure whether to beg, fight, or flee. I did not wait to find out. I opened the door wider, not as invitation, but as dismissal. Sophie's voice cracked as she spoke. "You'll regret this." I looked her in the eye. "I already regret the years I let you believe kindness was weakness." Then I closed the door, not slammed, closed, firm, final. I did not cry after they left. I did not shake. I did not feel triumph or sorrow. I felt something far quieter, like exhaling after holding my breath for decades. Not dramatic, not explosive, just finally allowed. That night, I slept without dreaming. The next morning, I woke with a clarity so sharp it almost stung. It was time. I called Richard and told him I was ready to finalize the last document, the one that would ensure that no one could rewrite my legacy once I was gone. Not out of bitterness, out of precision. He arrived at Claire's house in the late afternoon, briefcase in hand, expression solemn but warm. He was not sentimental. That was why I trusted him. He laid the papers on the table. "Your final will," he said. "Read it through one more time." I did. Every sentence was clean. Sharp. Unmistakable. Mark and Sophie were written out completely. Not a penny, not an heirloom, not even a photograph. The grandchildren were included, but conditionally. They would inherit only on proof of 1,000 hours of verified community work done not for credit, for character. If they grew into kind people, they would earn something. If they repeated their parents, they would inherit nothing. Fair. Richard looked at me when I finished. "Are you certain?" I signed without hesitation. "Absolutely." He gathered the papers, closed his briefcase, and nodded once. There was respect in that gesture. Not pity, not admiration, respect. After he left, Claire and I sat on the back porch with 2 glasses of wine. The sun was setting, painting the sky with muted oranges and soft pinks. She raised her glass. To the end, I clinked mine against hers. To the beginning, we drank. Later that evening, I finally went to see my new apartment. It was small. Quiet. High up enough that the city noises softened into a distant hum. There were no family photos on the walls, no marks of history, just empty space waiting to be claimed. I opened the window and let the air in. No one knew this address yet. No one could walk in unannounced. No one could stand at my door and demand anything from me ever again. I set my suitcase down and walked barefoot across the floor. My footsteps echoed. A sound I had not heard in years, my presence making noise. I stopped in the middle of the room and looked around. This was not where I would be remembered. This was where I would live, not as a mother, not as a caretaker, not as a placeholder in someone else's story, as myself. I whispered into the empty room, "My name is Andrea Sullivan, and I am finally mine."